We are in Desert National Wildlife Refuge. This is the largest wildlife refuge in the lower 48 states. It is some of the most pristine and intact Mojave Desert habitat left in the world. And it stretches from here up into Lincoln County. It's 1.6 million acres. That's twice the size of Rhode Island. And it is truly one of the crown jewels of the National Wildlife Refuge system. Well, it's extremely unique to have a place this intact. This place has been protected since the 1930s, and so as a result, there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for human impacts on the land. So it is really completely pristine across the majority of the refuge. So the Desert National Wildlife Refuge was designated to protect one of the biggest and best herds of desert bighorn sheep in the southwest United States. So there are hundreds of desert bighorn sheep who roam these mountains. The desert bighorn sheep is Nevada's state mammal and really iconic of the wildness of the Mojave Desert. Right next door to Desert National Wildlife Refuge is the Nevada Test and Training Range, which is an Air Force bombing range where they practice for warfare. And the Air Force has secondary jurisdiction, they call it, over about half of the wildlife refuge, where they use it for aerial training exercises and a small amount of target practice. But the vast majority of that large area is totally wild, undisturbed, and is managed by Fish and Wildlife Service for the preservation of wildlife. So for the past 5 years, the U.S. Air Force has proposed expanding their bombing range, taking over a majority of this wildlife refuge. And we've been fighting back against that for years. Currently, in its latest incarnation, this fight, the Air Force is poised to take over that entire shared management area. So an area the size of Rhode Island, 850,000 acres, would be taken over by the military and primarily used as a bombing range. So this shared management area is an extremely wild place right now. And the Air Force is proposing to build roads, to build radio towers, to drop in soldiers, parachute in soldiers, and then have them driving dune buggies and jeeps across the open landscape. So you're going to take a place that really is among the most wild and undisturbed in the southwestern United States and turn it into an industrial military training ground, which is severely disturbed by human impact. It would fundamentally change the character of this wildlife refuge. On that area, which is the size of Rhode Island, it's an enormous area we're talking about, Fish and Wildlife Service has the ultimate say as to what happens. So that land, while the military can do some things there, that land is managed primarily for the benefit of wildlife. And that really makes all the difference as far as its value for preserving the biodiversity of the Mojave Desert. That area is managed as de facto wilderness. So it is essentially managed in a pristine state where little, if any, human activity occurs. And that's tremendously beneficial to the wildlife that live there. Now, they say it would still be a part of the wildlife refuge, but ultimately the Air Force would have a say over what happens there. And so to us, that's a wildlife refuge in name only. The U.S. military has pursued a number of expansions of bombing ranges across the southwestern United States over the past couple of decades. So this is really the latest bombing range expansion, but it's come right here to our backyard in southern Nevada. And they've been proposing this in order to expand their capabilities, of course. But it's terribly unfortunate that they chose to target one of the most pristine and undisturbed protected areas in the United States for their war games. If the desert refuge is sacrificed, will it impact the wildlife? Yes. Will it impact people who come here? Yes. But it really will impact all southern Nevadans by chipping away at the wild heritage that makes southern Nevada so special. Well, we have made very clear how Nevadans feel about protecting the Desert Wildlife Refuge, and now the ball is really in Congress's court. We've always known this would end up in Congress, and currently there's a proposal on the table which was started by Rob Bishop of Utah to give the military that 850,000 acres. Well, they conducted an environmental impact analysis a couple of years ago, in which they really grossly downplayed the impacts of their proposed action. And we feel used flawed science to reach a conclusion that it wouldn't negatively impact the wildlife here. It is a well-known fact that desert bighorn sheep thrive in undisturbed areas, that desert tortoises thrive in roadless areas. So the idea that this wouldn't have a substantial impact on wildlife is a farce. Well, we've been fighting this campaign for years, starting back in 2017 to 2018 with this environmental impacts analysis the Air Force did. We turned out hundreds of people to a public meeting opposing this proposal. In the 2019 legislative session, the Nevada legislature passed Assembly Joint Resolution 2, opposing this expansion, and it would note that it was a bipartisan vote, 58-3, in favor of opposing this expansion. And then finally, Senator Cortez Masto and Congressman Horsford and the rest of the delegation introduced legislation last December to protect our Desert National Wildlife Refuge. So there's been a unified response from across Nevada opposing this expansion. I'll quote Dwight Eisenhower, "Beware the expansion of the military-industrial complex." The military has continued to bomb Nevada for decades. This was a nuclear testing site just a few miles up the road there. And so there's always been this idea that Nevada's expendable, that we can just drop bombs on it and no one will mind. And I think you're really seeing an evolution in consciousness where Nevadans are saying, no way, not in our state.